We want to rewrite this quantity as an algebraic expression of x, and then we also want to figure out the domain on which it's valid. So first of all, remember that the inverse trig function represents an angle. So I'm going to draw a triangle, and I'm going to label it so that the cosine is 4x. We know that cosine is adjacent over hypotenuse, so 4x over 1 will be adjacent and hypotenuse. Now let's go ahead and find the missing side. That would be 4x, that whole quantity squared, plus the missing side squared equals 1 squared. So b is going to be the square root of 1 minus 16x squared. So let's put that as our missing side here. It's going to be the square root of 1 minus 16x squared. Now we're ready to take the cosecant of this angle. So cosecant's reciprocal of sine. Sine is opposite over hypotenuse, so the reciprocal will be hypotenuse over opposite. So this is going to equal hypotenuse over opposite. So that is our answer, but now we need to figure out the domain. As we look at this answer, we've got two things to worry about. We do not want to divide by 0, so we have to exclude any x values that would make that denominator 0. And also, we can't square root a negative. That's undefined for real numbers, and so we've got to figure out what values we can use so that we don't have a negative under the square root. So let's take what is under the square root, 1 minus 16x squared, and let's figure out where it equals 0. I'm going to factor that. That's 1 plus 4x and 1 minus 4x. It's the difference of squares. Putting that equal to 0, if you set this first one equal to 0 and solve it, you'd get x equal negative 1/4. And then with the second one, you would get x equals 1/4. So we can't use those values, but those are our endpoints, negative 1/4 and 1/4. And so we either can use the end values or the middle. We see zeros in the middle. If we use 0, we do square root of positive. So we know that what we need is in between these two values, but we will round off and not include the endpoints because the endpoints, the square root of 0 is okay, but dividing by 0 is not. So our domain is from negative 1/4 to 1/4, not including the ends. Let's look at our other one. We have the same idea. The inverse trig function equals an angle. So I'm going to draw a triangle and I'm going to label it so that the tangent, which is opposite over adjacent, is 4x over 1. So opposite over adjacent. Now I need to take 1 squared plus the quantity 4x squared equals that hypotenuse squared. So the hypotenuse is going to be the square root of 1 plus 16x squared. So let's put that there, 1 plus 16x squared. Now we look and see what we want here, and we want the secant of this. And secant is the reciprocal of cosine. Cosine's adjacent over hypotenuse, so we want hypotenuse over adjacent. Let me move this out of the way so I can put the answer. So the answer is hypotenuse, which is square root of 1 plus 16x squared over adjacent, but adjacent's just 1, so we don't need to put that. So there is our solution. Now looking at the domain, well, because 16x squared is positive and then I'm adding 1 to it, I'm always going to have a positive under the square root. And I don't have to worry about dividing by 0 since there's not a fraction. And so our domain is all real numbers, and we say that in interval notation by saying negative infinity to infinity.